Welcome back.
Thanks, man. I wanted to actually touch on basically the same stuff we were talking on last time. I wanted to go to Isaiah 49
Yeah,
and
about the
it's,
the
yeah,
mysterious
so-
servant in Isaiah 49 that sounds like it's the prophet.
yeah,
Yeah, what about it?
yeah. What you don't think it's about Jesus, obviously, right?
No, I think this is either a reference to the remnant of Israel or a reference to the prophet being sent to Israel. We have a bunch of instances in the Hebrew Bible, the most famous being Amos, of the prophets being referred to as servants. So
Hmm.
I wouldn't have a problem interpreting Isaiah 49 as Isaiah speaking about himself being sent to the nation of Israel.
Okay. But what about the part where it says he'll be a light for Gentiles
Hmm.
and that his salvation will reach the ends of the earth?
Yeah. What about it?
Yeah. Well, how did the prophet Isaiah do that?
He didn't. That's why the prophecies all fail. All of these prophecies fail. Like if you read the restoration prophecies of Second Isaiah, none of them come true. Right.
Hmm.
So like
Yeah.
the interpretation that you're trying to provide is similar to what Jews in the first century were providing, which is, well, the prophecies can't fail. Therefore, we have to reinterpret them. And my position is quite clear. They just failed.
Yeah. Well, here's why I don't think they could have been fully fulfilled because once everything was finished, then that's basically the end of the earth, right? There's going to be judgment right after that. So it couldn't have been something that was immediate because then the gospel would have had no time to reach anybody.
I
So
disagree.
I,
I mean, go
yeah.
to Isaiah 49 with me and read what it actually says, right?
Mhm.
In verse 6, it says, "Is it too light a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the survivors of Israel?" This is talking about the restoration of the nation of Israel. And we've
Mhm.
seen it multiple times in the book of Isaiah where God says that Israel is going to be the light to the nations. It's through their restoration that they are going to
Mhm.
be a light and a covenant to the nations, right? So when I'm reading Isaiah 49, I'm reading, in context with the rest of Isaiah, that it's what the nations are witnessing with the restoration of Israel. That's the light. That's the thing that's going to bring them to Yahweh.
Yeah, but what about so how would that have reached the ends of the earth? Like people at that time,
Well,
where does the ends of the earth? Well, like that's what I'm
well, the
not
ends,
understanding.
the ends of the earth had nothing to do with what we think the ends of the earth look like today. Let me show you. Um, world. I'm going to show you a Greek world map, which is even too big for the time period of Isaiah. In fact, I've got a map on my wall that you can't see behind me, the Babylonian map. That's probably more representative of what Isaiah thought. I'll show you real quick. So the Babylonian map of the world is quite small, and see if there's a way to share the. I can share it with you. Hold on. I'm gonna turn on a feature real quick. Okay, so you should be able to see what's on my web browser. This is the Babylonian map of the world. The
Mhm.
general idea in the ancient Near East was that the ancient Near East was the center of the earth, and then it was more or less surrounded by water. They didn't know necessarily that Europe was there. They didn't know that China or Russia was there. They thought that their region of the world was just the world. And we have the same thing with the Greeks. If you go to the Greek map of the world, it basically includes the ancient Near East with a little bit of extra. It includes the Mediterranean Sea with, northern Africa and southern Europe and like nothing more, right? So
Mhm.
when I'm reading this prophecy about the ends of the earth, to me, I think two things are true. One, they have no idea how big the earth actually is, and number two is it's certainly quite possible that they're speaking euphemistically. But what seems not to be ambiguous is the goal of the person or the entity in chapter 49. The goal is to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the survivors of Israel. This is
Yeah.
a restoration prophecy,
Hmm.
right? And Jesus just didn't do that. His people got devastated.
Okay, but that brings me back to the original point that I was making. What happens after the restoration of Israel?
Well, it hasn't happened. That's what I'm saying.
Right, but what linearly, like after the restoration of Israel, what is to come?
So after the restoration, well, I would say during the restoration of Israel would be the New Jerusalem and the reapportioned Promised Land and the laws of Moses being completely restored.
Hmm. So you think that was a failed prophecy and not one to come in the future?
Yeah.
Like, but what would that imply for everyone else? I guess I should say. So a restored Israel, what does that imply for the rest of the world?
It would imply that Israel would be taken from which they had been scattered, according to Isaiah 11, Isaiah 2, and elsewhere. They would be taken from the ends of the earth, which they have been scattered, brought back to their homeland, and all of their ancient cities will be rebuilt. And then the 12 tribes will be in a reapportioned land, according to the ending of Ezekiel. And then they're all going to live with an actual king and a restored Levitical priesthood.
Hmm. But like, why don't you believe that that's something that's going to come over time? Like, why do you think it has to be something that happens instantly?
Well, because it seems quite clear that Isaiah was referring to the Babylonian exile when they come back from exile.
When they return, yeah, they rebuild the second temple, right? But it's not in the same splendor or glory as like the first one.
Well, we don't really know exactly what the first one was like. I personally would suggest that the Temple of Herod was way greater than the Temple of Solomon, but again, like the description of the temple in the Bible doesn't seem to match what we've discovered in the ancient Near East. So it might be kind of a grandiose description. That being said, I mean, the temple was pretty badass.
Hmm. But would you have like, okay, so let's say, I know you don't believe it was fulfilled, but you believe that's one of the possible fulfillments of it?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't think that there's like a possible partial fulfillment. I think these prophecies are just for the restoration of Israel after the Babylonian captivity, and they just didn't come true, which is why people had to start saying, "Well, it'll come true later," or it partially came true, and the rest will come true later. I know Jewish rabbis today that believe all these prophecies will come true eventually.
Hmm. Well, the New Testament writers affirm this like strongly to Jesus.
Mhm.
What do you think they were doing with that?
Well, I think they were doing the same thing they did everywhere else. They were just misreading the Old Testament and making it about themselves. The same thing they were doing in the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you read the Pesher on Nahum and Habakkuk, they're literally just going through the Old Testament prophets and saying, well, we're going to have to rework this. This is no longer about Greece. It's about so-and-so, right?
Hmm. I kind of see what you're saying, but at the same time, like, okay, so why do you accept like the validity of the Old Testament, but not the validity of the New Testament?
Oh, I don't. I think the Old Testament's false. That's why I'm not Jewish. It's just that when
Mm,
I'm having discussions with Christians, I think the most poignant piece of argumentation is demonstrating that the New Testament simply is not a valid reading of the Hebrew Bible.
hmm. But you don't think it's because it has different contexts?
No, it certainly does have different context, but the question is, what did the author mean when they wrote it, right? So, for example, like I could
Right. Yeah.
say,
Right.
yeah,
That I think is very important.
when Isaiah wrote those words, what did those words mean, and what did they mean to his audience, right? And
Right.
what the
But we
new
also have to come with it through the lens that it's God who's orchestrating this plan through Isaiah. It's not just Isaiah speaking of his own accord, making his own prophecies.
No, I mean, yeah, in your worldview, yeah, they're obviously not just Isaiah's words, but they have to have actual meaning to the audience and understanding to the audience. And these words are
Yep.
essentially meaningless to the audience of Isaiah unless they're about his actual audience, right?
Hmm. And it's possible that he is still referring to them. I mean, Isaiah 49:3 refers to the servant as Israel,
Hmm.
but then in 49:6 it also it also refers to him as someone distinct from Israel who will return Israel to himself, to God.
Right. No, no, it didn't. Well, it says that they're going to raise up the tribes of Jacob and restore the survivors of Israel, right? But the same thing Jeremiah said in Jeremiah 25, Jeremiah 30, Jeremiah 31. It says after the Babylonian exile, God's going to bring them back to the land and completely restore them. Same thing, Isaiah 56.
He'll bring them back to the land and completely restore them. That was Jeremiah what? 30.
It's going to be in Jeremiah 25, 30, and 31, and a little bit in 33. And you also want to see Ezekiel 36 and Ezekiel 37.
Actually, could you bring them up on screen, or maybe just one of them?
Yeah.
Just
so
for everyone.
I think one of my favorites is actually going to be in Ezekiel 37. I think this is the clearest messianic, one of the clearest messianic passages other than Jeremiah 33 that I think illustrates what my point is. Let me make sure that you can see it too. Hold on. Okay, you should be able to see it. Okay, so in verse 24, this is after the valley of the dry bones, right? So he's writing to them in Babylon about their restoration, and he gives them the valley of the dry bones and says, this is the whole nation of Israel, so on and so forth, talks about the restoration of Israel. Then he says, my servant David shall be king over them, and they shall have one shepherd. They shall follow my ordinances and be careful to observe my statutes. They shall live in the land that I gave to my servant Jacob, in which your ancestors lived, they and their children's children shall live there forever, and my servant David will be their prince forever. So I'm under the understanding from the actual direct messianic prophecies that when the Messiah comes, they're going to be restored to the land.
I did hear mention of a shepherd there. You don't think that has anything to do with Jesus? Like I kind of heard Jesus all over that when you were speaking that.
I didn't hear Jesus once. Was David a shepherd?
David was a king. I don't know if he was a shepherd before that.
He was the great shepherding king, yes.
Yeah.
And
you don't think that could be like a foreshadowing of Jesus also being a king and a shepherd?
But he was never a king.
He is the heir to the throne. Yeah, he
certainly isn't.
God. Yeah, for sure.
Well, show me a passage where he's sitting on the throne of King David then.
Where he's sitting on the king he's sitting on the throne of King David? Why is that necessary?
Because that's what makes you a king. Like
can
I could say I'm
a little bit and look it up to see if there's one.
You're welcome to.
Yeah, okay.
If I said I'm the spiritual president, does it mean I'm the president?
If you're the spiritual president?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if it was a heavenly office, I guess so.
How could you? Shit, I'm the president, y'all.
Well, so Luke 1:32-33, he will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High.
Yeah.
The Lord will give him the throne of his father David.
Yeah.
And he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever.
Which never happened.
Well, Luke is saying this about Jesus.
He said it will happen, but it didn't happen.
What do you mean it didn't happen? Yeah,
it did.
That's the whole New Testament.
Okay, then show me the passage. Show me the passage where he sat on David's throne and ruled over the people.
Oh, I see what you're saying. But that's in the second coming.
Then it didn't happen yet.
Right, it didn't happen yet. That's
okay,
fine.
Then he didn't fulfill any prophecies. So I could just say that by the same virtue, I'll fulfill the prophecy when I come back. Then.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll just have to see who comes back, right?
Right. That's the thing. Like you can make.
Here's a case then. Who is more likely? Like, okay, you're both making a claim. You're going to come back. He's saying he's going to come back. How do we compare the claims that you guys are making to see who is being honest and who is not?
All you got to do is wait to see who comes back and does the thing. And right now, Jesus hasn't done it, which means the claim shouldn't be taken seriously.
Yeah, but there were prior fulfillments to the prophecies that you're speaking about, like being born in Bethlehem.
Nope.
That had to be fulfilled
That
beforehand.
didn't get fulfilled.
Bethlehem, so you can't.
That never got fulfilled in Jesus.
What do you mean?
You haven't read Micah 5. What does it say about the person born in Micah 5?
Micah 5. What does it say about the person?
Because as it turns out, a lot of people were born in Bethlehem. That doesn't make them the fulfillment of it.
Of
right?
course.
So
Of course. Of
what's it
course.
say
So,
in verse 2 and 3?
but you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah?
Ephrathah? It's a tough one, I know, don't
Ephrathah?
worry.
Oh, jeez.
That's a tough
Though you
one.
are, yeah, yeah, it is. Though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come from me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from
Mhm.
ancient times.
Yeah, so
There,
Jesus didn't rule
yeah,
over Israel.
will be ruler over Israel.
Right.
But that's what we're talking about in Ezekiel 37. He's going
But
to be the one who sits on the throne
he
of the
didn't.
descendants of Jacob.
But he didn't do it. That's the problem with prophecy.
Right.
You
But this is
can't
what it's saying.
but you
But
can't appeal
yeah,
to a prophecy that you think he'll fulfill later as fulfilled prophecy. If he hasn't done it yet, that means it's not fulfilled.
yeah, that's fine. I'm saying it's in the process of being fulfilled.
Well, sure.
The prophecy
When he fulfills it, he'll be the
commenced.
Messiah, but he hasn't fulfilled it.
It'll be the ultimate fulfillment of the Messiah. I agree. Yeah.
Sure. Listen, if Jesus comes back and does all the stuff that the Messiah is supposed to do, I'm more than happy to call him the Messiah. But until he does it, he's just not.
At that point, it's going to be too late, though, because he already fulfilled the first half of the prophecy of being the suffering servant.
That's not even a prophecy. So this is the
Isaiah
this is the
53.
this is the
Isaiah
point of agreement
53
we
is
had
the
last time.
prophecy.
Is Isaiah 53 is
Yeah.
not about a suffering servant
Well,
dying on a cross. It's clearly a metaphor about the nation of Israel.
right, but it's just an interpretational difference.
And so is
Like,
yours. You're
we
just
can't.
interpreting
Right,
Jesus
exactly.
into it.
No, I
But
know. I know. I know.
my interpretation includes the context of the Old Testament and the context
Mhm.
of Isaiah. Yours doesn't.
No, I think it does. I think it just also has a layered meaning to it. I
Show
think
me
there's
one
layered meaning
passage
all over the
other
Bible.
than Isaiah 53 where the Messiah is going to die.
One passage other than Isaiah 53. Okay. Can I look it up?
Mhm.
Can it be from the New Testament or only Old?
Obviously, the Old Testament, the prophecies in the New Testament come
Fair
after
enough.
Jesus.
Fine. Psalm 22.
Psalm 22 is not a prophecy.
But Jesus references it on the cross,
And
so
he'd
it
be
could be seen
wrong.
as. How could he be wrong?
Because
What are you talking about,
so
bro?
now you're
Okay,
providing a circular
okay,
argument.
look,
You're saying it's a
okay,
prophecy
so
because the guy that fulfilled the prophecy said it's a prophecy. I could just say that that Deuteronomy
but
18
okay,
is
but on what
actually
authority does he
about a
say it?
false
On what
prophet.
authority?
I have the same authority as Jesus does.
What do you mean?
We
You
both
didn't
have
do
the same authority.
miracles. You didn't do
Oh,
miracles.
sure,
What are you
I do
talking
miracles all the
about?
time. I've he-
You did-
I've healed literally. Ruby, I want to make sure you
No,
understand
be
what's happening.
real.
I want to
Be
understand,
real right
Ruby.
now.
I need you to catch up. Hold
Yeah,
on. Okay, so
be real.
in order to make these prophecies about Jesus, you're saying I already believe everything the New Testament says. We'll stop doing that. Pretend the New Testament didn't get written and
Okay.
explain all this eisegesis. Just pretend you're reading the Old Testament and ask yourself, does this prophesy about anything? Is there a prophecy in Psalm 2? Is there a prediction for the future? Or do you only think it's a prophecy because Jesus quoted verse 1?
No, I think I don't think it reads as a prophecy, but
Obviously, because it's not.
I think revelation can reveal something deeper. I don't think that it had to be like I think that revelation could obviously reveal a deeper message within what's already there. It doesn't have to be like, oh, just because you got the message once, like that's it. You could build upon the
Okay.
basis that you've already made.
So then the revelation is that it's about Simon Bar Kokhba.
Who?
Simon Bar Kokhba, he was killed by the Romans.
Okay.
He was a Messiah, a Jewish leader, and was actually a ruler in Israel for a period of about 4 years. So obviously the suffering servant, Simon Bar Kokhba.
But I think you're missing the point.
I'm not missing the point. See, the problem that you have is you're using a circular argument. You're saying these are prophecies because the guy that I already think is God said they're prophecies. But if the prophecies are the thing that substantiate him being special, then you can't start with the fact, well, they're prophecies because my special guy said so. That becomes circular because I could do the same thing. I could write myself into all these prophecies. I could say, well, they don't look like prophecies, but they are prophecies because I said so. And because you think I'm special, I must be right.
So they have to be explicit prophecies.
That to be actual prophecies.
Mm-hmm. So, I can't think of any, but
Right.
do you know of any explicit prophecies in that way? Like, can you give me one even not related to Jesus so I could see a comparison between what you're talking about?
Yeah, literally every prophetic book is full of them. Like we can just go to Zephaniah chapter 2 real quick. All right, we'll do Zephaniah 1. Sorry. Wish I had my paper Bible with me. I've only got the internet with me right now.
Yeah, that's okay. That's what I got.
Okay, so Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 10 says, "On that day, says the Lord, a cry will be heard from the fish gate, a wail from the second quarter, a loud crash from the hills. The inhabitants of the mortar wail," so on and so forth. He's saying something will happen. Like this is clearly a prophecy. Now, there's other forms of prophecies in the Bible as well, where divine information is being told. For example, when David meets with Nathan in 2 Samuel chapter 12, and Nathan convicts him of his sin. Well, Nathan is technically doing prophecy because Nathan is saying this is information from the Lord, right? So, like any information from the Lord through a prophet, I think can be considered prophetic, but you still know in the time that it is prophetic. Like you don't have to, like, hundreds of years later look back and be like, "Oh, that actually was prophetic and no one knew it."
Okay, but then you're giving credit to the messianic prophecies.
No, I'm not.
It sounded like that's what you were just doing.
No, what I'm saying is that the New Testament is abusing the prophecies or so-called prophecies of the Old Testament. That's all I'm saying. I don't think that these prophecies will ever come true. Right? Like if you look at Isaiah 11, right? So Matthew is making an argument that Jesus moved to Nazareth in order to fulfill Isaiah chapter 11, where it says he will be called a Nazarene, which is like a little play on words to branch. But if you just read what is in chapter 11, Jesus didn't do any of that stuff in chapter 11. It says he's actually going to rule over the people. He's going to judge them. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth and the breath of his lips. He's going to kill all the wicked people. Then it talks about world peace. The wolf will lie down with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the kid. They're going to be, they're not going to learn of war anymore. They're not going to hurt or destroy on my holy mountain. Earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord. Like these are very clear passages that are truly prophetic about, the one that's coming from David, and none of them just match Jesus, right? That's why the New Testament has to go to parts of the Hebrew Bible that aren't prophecies to make a case for Jesus.
Okay, what about like Zechariah 9:9?
Yeah, that's a quotation from Matthew chapter 21. And I think Zechariah 9:9 suffers from the same problem as Micah 5:2, because if you go to verses 9 and 10 in that chapter, just look at what it says about the person. Rejoice, greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow will be cut off, and he shall command peace to the nations, and his dominion will be from sea to sea, from the river to the ends of the earth. Well, that's clearly referring to an actual king.
Right, but Jesus... Okay, I see what you're saying. So, I see what you're saying. But I guess the point that I'm making is if you have so many, like, you could call them hidden prophecies if you want, like where they're not explicit, you have to like kind of read them into it. But if you could read him into every single one, then isn't that just something underlying like a greater structure and not something that you're reading into it?
No,
Because
I don't think
if
you
you only
can.
fit like a couple of them, then I would understand. You're like, okay, you're picking and choosing. He fits this one, he didn't fit that one. But okay, so that's the point that you're making. The end time prophecies haven't been fulfilled, so he is only fulfilling like some of them. But I still don't think
But he
that's
didn't
a
fulfill
problem.
anything. He didn't fulfill a single prophecy.
Yeah. What do you mean? He came riding on a donkey.
So I rode a donkey.
Okay, but in the
But
context
the
of what's
context is that a king is riding a donkey, and Jesus was not a king.
Jesus was a king.
No, he was
He
not.
is the King of Kings.
He's not. I'm the King of
Yeah.
Kings.
Well, okay, so Paul died for the belief that he was.
Well, so what? A lot
Paul
of
Paul didn't die. Paul didn't die saying I'm the King of Kings. He died saying Jesus is the King of Kings.
916 people died for Jim Jones being the second coming of the Messiah. That means nothing to me.
Yeah, hang on. I think there's something to unpack here. Why is that different? I guess he didn't have a long-standing legacy, because people could have like investigated his claims, and the fact that his claims didn't carry on is kind of proof that he wasn't telling the truth.
Well, Jesus's claims not being true has nothing to do with them carrying on. We see lots of religions where their claims are clearly untrue and they live on, like Muhammad splitting the moon in two. That's ridiculous, and people have believed it ever since Muhammad.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We have
And
lots of
they believe it, but they believe it in spite of other things they saw. I do believe that like Islam, there's like a valid reason for it. I mean, I don't know about you. I don't think you believe in things invisible. Otherwise, you'd believe in God. But I do believe there's something going on there. So I think that's a reason why, even though it's false, there's still followers of it. But then you could just apply the same thing to Christ. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I just think the people at the time, like, it's not like they like Jesus was crucified and then they went to like other cities and were like, yeah, this person died over here. Like they preached it in the city where he was, where people would have seen him like crucified or risen. People would have been able to check with the information, and they would have been able to disprove him like very easily if he was just making it up.
no, he was gone. How do you disprove somebody existing when you can't find them? Right? So if someone says Jesus rose from the dead and the dude's not around, how do
Yeah.
you that's that's an unfalsifiable claim.
Well, exactly. Isn't that the problem? They buried Jesus and then they couldn't find him.
I don't believe that to be the case, because we've got lots of stories of people in the ancient world where they just show up missing, right? We have no idea where he was buried. Nobody knows. You either
We
believe
do.
the stories or you don't, and I don't believe the stories. But like bodies going missing were pretty common in the time period.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, if you give the Bible some credit, then it says that there's a Roman emperor watching the tomb.
well, there was guards in the Gospel of Matthew.
Yeah.
And then they fell like dead man when at the sight of the angel, and then eventually they woke up and ran off to tell the leader. But I don't believe these narratives, because these narratives keep lying to me about what is in the Hebrew Bible, right? So Christianity is basically one big sharpshooter fallacy. You start with the notion that the New Testament is true, and then you work yourself backwards.
But here's the thing you have to understand is that at the time they didn't have the full New Testament. It was being like Jesus was revealing it as he was going on, and people still believed him. It's not like they didn't come with the preconception that
I don't think
we
they
have
did.
now.
I don't think they believed him. That's why Jesus only had, a certain amount of disciples, and he was rejected by the leaders of Israel. And when Paul came around, the Jews rejected Paul too. Paul could only gain ground with the Gentiles, and that's why all of the New Testament is literally written in a Gentile language, almost exclusively to Gentiles.
Well, Paul was accepted by the apostles. I think Acts, is it 3 or 15 he's accepted?
Well, in Acts, he has a meeting with them in Acts chapter 15, but like elsewhere, he's literally having like a fight with Peter over the position of eating with the Gentiles. But again, look at who these churches are. All the churches that Paul planted are Gentile churches. Very few Jewish people among them. You might make the argument that perhaps the church in Galatia had a Jewish presence, but I don't even know if that's to be the case.
Well, the thing you just mentioned in Acts 15, what they're discussing is, I believe it's circumcision, and then
For whom?
Peter, for the Gentile.
That's
whether it's
right, yeah.
necessary or not,
Because
faith.
Paul's followers were Gentiles. Paul's trying to figure out, how do I get these Gentiles grafted in? Because he sees
Right.
the law as prohibitive, right? Because the Jews didn't believe Paul's message.
Yeah, but this is when we go back to Isaiah 49. You see the light to the Gentiles. How are you going to reach the Gentiles if what you have doesn't fit with them? You're going to
Because
try to reconcile it a little bit,
when you
and that's what
read
Paul does.
when you read all of Isaiah, the prophet tells you that it's the restoration of Israel that is the light to the Gentiles. It says they will see your vindication and they will run to you. When the Lord restores Israel, that's the light to the Gentiles. That's the signal that says, holy shit, this God is real. Look at what he did for Israel.
No, it says, "It is too small a thing for you to be my servant, to restore the tribes of Jacob and bring back the hope of, bring back those of Israel I have kept. I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach the ends of the earth."
I'm not quoting
Doesn't-
49,
Oh, what were you quoting?
56. If you read all of it, and this is I'd say the biggest issue with the Isaiah apologetics is all you have to do is read chapter 40 to the end of the book, read chapter 40 to 66, and it is abundantly clear that the thing that is bringing the nations to Yahweh is the restoration of the people. He says it 100 times. 56 verse 1, maintain justice and do what is right, for soon my salvation will come and my deliverance be revealed. Happy is the mortal who does this, the one who holds it fast and keeps the Sabbath, not profaning it, and refrains from. So the salvation is going to include maintaining the Sabbath. And he goes on about the foreigners joining in. For example, he says in verse 6, the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, all who keep the Sabbath and do not profane it and hold fast to my covenant, these I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar. All the prophecies about the nations being gathered in Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel includes the law of Moses, and it includes them finding out who Yahweh is through the nation, not through some guy that died.
And so you think the nation of Israel has its light has shone on the whole world?
No, that's why I'm telling you, the prophecy did not come true, and it will never come true. That your fundamental starting point is that the prophecy cannot fail, and because it cannot fail, I cannot interpret it the way it was originally written.
I think that the redemption of Israel actually came through Jesus.
I don't think it did. It says that the redemption of Israel is including the rebuilding of the ruined cities and coming back to the land, but that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Would you argue that we're closer to it now than we were before?
No.
No.
In fact, Isaiah tells you it's supposed to be back then. It says, you shall call nations that do not know you, and the nations that do not know you shall run to you, because the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, has glorified you. The idea of...
I'm not denying that it has a double meaning of being about Israel at the time, and then, because at the time, if you're revealing it, it has to have context to what they're going through. So it can't just be about the future, or else the revelation that they're having is doing nothing for them now. But that doesn't discredit the fact that it could be something also pointing to the future.
Right. So we finally got to a point of agreement. The only way to make this a Christian passage is to apply a double meaning to it. Now, the question I would have is, why in the world would I apply a double meaning to a text when the first meaning within the original context is clear?
Because you just said it doesn't fulfill it.
Exactly.
If it's not fulfilled in the original thing, then obviously that's not the answer.
The answer is that it's a lie. It's not true. It's never coming true because this God doesn't exist. Yes.
You're just saying that.
That is the case.
Look, and you're saying in the original context, it's not fulfilled, so it's not true. I'm saying in the original context, it's not fulfilled, so they have a redeemer. And that's what's gonna so they're gonna be redeemed.
They don't.
Yes, bro. The fact that it wasn't fulfilled shows the need for a redeemer, because otherwise they wouldn't need a redeemer if they would have fulfilled it themselves.
They didn't need a redeemer in the first place. What didn't they? No. This actually is going to come to the biggest difference, and we didn't talk about this yet. The biggest difference between the New Testament idea and the Hebrew Bible idea of the afterlife, which is, why do we need redeemed?
Bro, Isaiah 49:7. This is what the Lord says: "The Redeemer and Holy One of Israel
is Yahweh." I know, but why do we need redeemed? We need redeemed
No. They actually apply this to Jesus here, or the servant. This is what the Lord says: "The Redeemer and Holy One of Israel, to him who is despised and abhorred the nation."
The Lord is the Redeemer, Holy One of Israel.
Kings will see you and stand up; princes will see and bow down, because the Lord who is faithful, the Holy One of Israel, who has chosen you.
Yeah, God is the Holy One who's faithful, but he's also not real.
Also applying it to the servant here.
But he's not, though. Again, this goes back to double meaning,
Yeah.
right? I don't
But
believe
if
in
you
double meanings. I
fulfill,
have no reason
yeah.
to believe in double. Like if there's a double
Okay,
meaning,
what
then
is the reason for
how do
not
I know there's
believing?
not a triple meaning?
Mhm. Well, you would have to see if
Because
it fit. Sure.
well,
If
the
it fits,
Mormons have triple meaning to these prophecies. Did they get it right?
do they fit in the context?
Yeah. No, no. You told me the context doesn't matter
No. I see. Okay, so they fit the description perfectly.
because, well,
There's many prophecies. There's multiple
your
prophecies,
your
multiple.
secondary interpretation does not fit the context, and it certainly doesn't fit the prophecy perfectly. You have to pick and choose one verse here and another verse there, and then ignore the rest of them. So you can't say that your secondary interpretation fits perfectly because it doesn't. It's just a cherry picked interpretation. What I'm saying is that the only interpretation we should be holding is that which seems to be in accordance with the context of the original intention of the passage and not make up secondary interpretations. And I think, as I pointed out earlier, I think the biggest difference that could be, I think, a symmetry breaker for this conversation is just this idea of you have a very different idea of what salvation even means versus what the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible means with salvation, right? So if I ask you, what does salvation mean to you? What would you say?
Yeah, being saved, not going to hell.
From what? Okay, saved from hell. Okay. Can you find me a single verse in the Old Testament that says anyone's going to hell?
Mm, I'm not sure the point, but no, I not off by hand, I should say.
Right. So my reading is that the New Testament and people of the New Testament time period, like you can see a little bit of, creeping up in the Dead Sea Scrolls, invented this notion of eternal punishment. But it wasn't until you get to the New Testament that you have this crazy idea that people are going to be eternally punished for simply not believing the right thing. According to Jewish theology, the punishment in the afterlife is temporary. It's a maximum of 12 months, and it's for only the truly wicked. Whether or not you believe in the God didn't necessarily make you wicked. So, for example, there's a reason why Jews don't proselytize. It's because they don't believe that God's going to send everybody to hell because they didn't believe in the right God. That's strictly a Christian belief. You won't find that in the Hebrew Bible,
I agree. Yeah.
right? So when we get to the New Testament and they're saying, well, no, you have to believe all these things, even though they're rather unbelievable and they're going against the context of the book itself. Like, I don't see a reason to believe that. And be like, well, you have to, or else you can go to hell. Well, I don't believe that hell exists, even if I am Jewish. Like, I don't
Yeah.
believe that notion of hell.
hmm I understand. The way that I think about it is like, sorry, I just had a total brain fart right there.
It's okay. We all
Uh,
do.
yeah.
It's 10
So like,
o'clock. I'm going to have some soon. Just
yeah. Sorry, just bear with me here for a second. So, could you just repeat the last part you were saying?
Yeah, what I'm saying is it's hard for me to like the prophecies in the New Testament themselves are problematic for me, but just like the theological differences between the Old and the New Testament, this idea that if you don't believe the right thing, that God is just going to torture you either
Yeah.
temporarily or for eternity, that's really not a Hebrew scripture belief,
Mhm.
right?
So it's important to them. Yeah. I think that mode of salvation actually makes sense. I understand what you're saying. Your point is that it doesn't really align with what they believed in the past. But I think that mode of salvation is more easily like available to everyone, and that's why they did the transition. Um, I think that, like you said, the Gentiles had a lot of problems with the laws that they had to uphold, and so they weren't too happy with the strictness of it. And I think God basically obliges.
To
Um,
what?
to helping people reach their own salvation, not by their own works, but just by grace
Right,
through faith.
but my point is the mode isn't a meaningful distinction to me. I'm saying that the idea that you need salvation in Christianity is essentially that you need saving from God. Like God's going to do something horrible to you for like the most ridiculous offense.
It's not so much that God's going to do something horrible to you, it's that you're not going to be with God, and that's going to be horrible.
Can God make it not horrible?
So I think God is what is good. So it's like a thing without God could be neutral, maybe, but it couldn't be great. It couldn't even be good.
So God's not capable of creating some place in between heaven and hell
Mm,
where you would
yeah,
go
I
and you
guess.
weren't
I guess.
tortured.
Yeah.
Okay, so he could do that.
I don't know. To me, I see what you're saying. It would make sense. Like, yeah, you could just like create like a place where it's like, all right, you don't want to hang out with me. You could just go over here, and you don't need to like have something horrible, or it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be horrible. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So like
I don't know why God didn't do it that way.
right, that's kind of the problem. That's where Christian theology falls apart for a lot of people outside of Christianity is
Mhm.
they don't understand this whole hell concept because it's a false
Yeah.
dichotomy, right? It's like
I don't. That's the thing. I don't even fully understand it as well. Like, if I'm being honest, I just know that my idea of hell is separation from God, and I don't want that.
I get that, and there is a Bible verse that kind of touches on that. It says that there's going to be suffering and also separation from God.
Mhm.
But the problem for me is that I just don't see why a God that's all loving, all knowing, and all good would explicitly create vessels of wrath to be tormented in the afterlife. That's a nonsensical idea to me, and it really doesn't even line up with the Old Testament. Like, as far as I can tell, this concept of hell that is cooked up in the New Testament was legitimately only done so to give people a reason why they should convert to Christianity.
Mhm. Well, I think it is a scary idea. I'll give you that. Like, it does strike fear in you, but I think the Bible is also very clear that, like, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So I think in that case, he's setting up this thing. It is scary. Like, the thought of not being with God is scary, and it's supposed to be to deter you from not wanting to, be away from him.
But
Maybe, yeah.
if I wanted my child to spend time with me, is the appropriate way what's better that I would show myself through acts of endless love and being present, or I should just threaten him?
Okay, well, that's where Christ comes in for us. As a Christian, we believe that Jesus actually, or God, actually came down in the
Right. But I
flesh.
don't because he's not
Obviously,
here. God could reveal himself right now to every individual on the earth and
yeah,
he wouldn't even break a sweat, right? What he
right.
did was sent this illogical human sacrifice, even though in the Hebrew Bible, he literally says, no man can die for the sins of another. And he says in Jeremiah, he says, I didn't
He's
even
not a man, though.
conceive.
He's not just a man.
Well,
But yeah.
well, I mean, the logical problems of the Trinity, I think, is another side topic. But so it's convoluted to say that, well, this guy that was killed by the Romans, that was God, and that's the sign that he loves you. No bullshit. If he loves us, he should fix bone cancer in babies. He should fix the children that are born blind. Like, he should fix earthquakes and volcanoes and tornadoes.
Yeah, but that's the promise of the new earth, the new heaven.
So what?
So why, like, you would have nothing to look forward to, and also,
Yeah, I
okay,
would.
so I think about it like this. So if we were in Adam and Eve's position, we had everything, we were in heaven, or like the garden, whatever, it was still perfect. We would still have eaten from that apple
So what?
no matter what.
So what?
So even though, so if we were given heaven right away,
What's that got to do with natural disasters?
my point is if we were given heaven right away, we would take it for granted and we would wonder what it would be like to be without. So God is showing us what it's like to be with sin
So
and to
babies don't
be
go to
with
heaven.
grudge. What? No, of course babies go to heaven.
But they
What do
they
you mean?
can't but they can't appreciate heaven. You just said it. You just said we have to experience the horrible
Yeah.
shit so we can appreciate heaven. But babies, like, if you died in birth, you don't get to experience the horrible shit.
Yeah, we could also have a collective understanding though.
Okay,
But
so
for the
you don't
yeah,
have to experience horrible stuff to enjoy heaven.
and not everyone does. It's like you said, some babies die and still
Okay,
go to
so
heaven.
then the natural disasters aren't necessary.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, they wouldn't be necessary if it's not necessary for all people.
Hmm.
Um, but I just think, in general, as a people, we had to experience it.
Why?
Um, well, because if your baby's like, well, I want to know what, like, I want to know what hell is like, you just like, all right, well, that's dumb. We know what it's like. We don't need to go back to that. Like, you have other people, even if you didn't experience it yourself. Um, yeah,
But
I guess we could just take God's word for it, but Adam didn't take God's word for it. Neither did Eve. That's
right,
the story. It's like we're kind of rebellious by nature, right?
but it's still missing the point. Rebellious or not, natural disasters don't
Yeah.
need to exist for anything.
No, I guess you're right. They don't necessarily need to exist for anything. But again, I don't like. I'm not God. I don't know why he has natural disasters. We can question about it. Obviously, I mean, we are now. Um, I think we probably could have done without, but I think God knows better.
Why?
Why does God know better? Because he knows everything, and I don't.
See, a lot of and I was so when I was a young apologist, I made a lot of these same statements you're making, and an atheist, a friend of mine, pointed out rightly that all of my arguments start with my belief is already true, and then I work myself backwards. He says start from the opposite end. Start as though you never learned any of this nonsense, and
Yeah,
then with every
I
single
started there. I started there, and then I came here.
well, it sounds like we took different paths. So the problems if you start at the very beginning and assume that there's no God, there's no good reason to get to a God.
Yeah, right. Well, when I was younger, I didn't believe in God.
Sure, but what would convince me? What problem does a God solve? What do I need it for?
What do you need God for?
Yeah, what does
Well,
God explain?
if God is real, it explains where we came from,
But
right?
again, it doesn't explain where God came from. Like I believe that the universe always existed, so we didn't come from anywhere.
Yeah, that's fine. So in your view, it doesn't really make a difference, I guess.
Right. Yeah. God doesn't really solve a problem in my worldview, right? In fact, I think it introduces more problems. And I think
Yeah,
specifically the
well,
biblical
I
God.
agree with that because the reason God introduces more problems is because it forces us to face our own shortcomings.
No, it faces me it forces me to face the shortcomings of the God explanation because as soon as you introduce a God, now you've got to introduce attributes of God. You have to introduce reasons why God does certain things, and then you've got to make apologies for the things that He does. So, for example, and I know people who watch me regularly are probably tired of me saying it. Like the idea that God would have, and you and I might have talked about it, have 10 of David's wives graped for David's sin is a horrific move. There's no explanation for that.
Oh yeah, we actually spoke about this. So we spoke about this last time,
Mhm.
and I kind of conceded the point, but um, that punishment was actually suggested by his advisor. It wasn't God who. I know you had said that it was God who did it because he says he's gonna like send the punishment, but
He
he
says,
allows the punishment to happen.
he says, I'm
But he's
causing it.
I know, but again, I'm gonna stand. Last time I gave you the ground. Last time I conceded, but this time I'll stand my ground. Even in 2 Thessalonians 2, it says God's gonna send a powerful delusion, but it doesn't mean He is the source of the delusion.
Yep.
It just means that He is allowing it to happen.
Nope. It's
Yeah.
definitionally true. If God was just allowing it to happen, he would say, I'm just allowing it to happen. But that's not the case because in 2 Samuel chapter 12, he says, I will raise up trouble against you and I will take your wives. He's giving the causation to himself.
Mhm. But second, sorry, which one is it again?
Yeah,
Second
2 Samuel
Samuel.
12.
Uh,
And keep in mind, this is a punishment. Punishments are a reaction to something. Like punishments don't happen by accident.
mhm. Right, but you could punish someone and then just allow whatever, like, if I say, okay, go punish this person how you see fit, is that on God, whatever that person does?
If God says I'm causing it, yeah.
No, if God says this punishment is going to come upon you, and then, because, hang on, I don't see isn't it someone else who, like, advises him, like his advisor tells him to do that or something?
So Absalom consults Ahithophel, and Ahithophel says the thing that you should do is go in and sleep with your father's concubines, and then you'll make
Right.
yourself odious.
So that wasn't God.
It was
Maybe God
again.
put that in the heart of the man to go say that.
Well, it says, "I will raise up trouble against you from within your house, and I will take your wives." He's taking the blame for it because it's
Okay,
his
so
punishment.
so let's go to 2 Thessalonians 2.
Is 2 Thessalonians 2 referring to David's sin?
It's referring to a powerful delusion that God will send, but it's not God that's the source of the delusion.
Did he send it?
But
Then
he's
he's
not
the
the
source.
source.
Yeah, you are. If you send
He
it,
he allows.
if
Okay,
you
I know the
if
wording
you
is
sending it, you're the one doing it.
the wording implies that
Yeah,
he's the one
words
sending
mean
it.
things.
But yeah, of course, the wording implies that. But God is not a deceiver. So
He
how could God
is.
say, "I'm a deceiver and I send a deception"?
He literally does.
That's an internal contradiction.
I know the Bible's full of them, hundreds of them.
No, so obviously you have to obviously you have to interpret it in light of the other verses. Otherwise,
I
you're just
do, and the Bible contradicts itself all over the
and
place.
you're obviously not. If God is sending a powerful delusion and he's not a deceiver, how
He
does that
is,
line up?
because it's a contradiction. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Right. You have
See,
to resolve
so
the
again,
apparent contradiction.
all
Well,
of
you're
your
not
arguments
no, you're not
begin
proving
with
yeah.
the Bible is true. That's the problem. If you don't start your argument with the Bible has to be true, then none of these arguments work.
But you're just saying
Because I could do the same thing
here's
with the
the apparent
Quran.
contradiction,
I
and then
could
you're not
say
giving it the luxury of
I can
figuring
say
out what it actually
I can
means.
say everything in the Quran is true because it can't be wrong. And then every time I find a contradiction in the Quran, I can say, well, it can't be a contradiction because then it wouldn't be true. Like you wouldn't accept that argument, and I'm not going to accept it for the Bible.
No, because you then try to resolve the apparent contradiction, right?
But you can't resolve it. It's just a contradiction. If God says that I'm not the author of confusion and that he's not a deceiver, and then he sends deceiving spirits, then he is literally the author of confusion. But I think the real answer, the one that you should use if you're going to make this argument, is that when it says God is not the author of confusion, you should go back to the original context of that passage, because I don't think it was actual making a blanket statement that God can never cause confusion. I think people mistake that.
Yeah, but I mean, just in general, God is not called the deceiver. The deceiver is called Satan. I'm sure there's a verse about that.
Yeah, he was a liar and a deceiver according to Jesus
correct.
and First John. But my point is, in 2 Samuel chapter 12, God says, I'm causing the thing to happen. So you can't take
Yeah.
God's agency from it.
In 2 Thessalonians 2, he's saying, I will send a powerful delusion.
Then he's the cause of it.
But then you're saying he's an idiot. You're saying that he doesn't know what he said before, where he's saying that Satan.
It happens all the time. Yes. Again, your starting point is God can't contradict himself. And my starting point is words mean words.
No, even if I just take it blanket, like if I just read the two verses, okay, so God sends down a powerful delusion, but Satan is the deceiver. How is that apparent contradiction resolved?
Did God send it?
Go into it. Right. What does that mean that God sent
that
it?
means God's the one that sent it. He's the one in control of it. Just like if I said, listen, I'm
granting you that at face value, it's a contradiction, right?
Yes, I know it's a contradiction on face value.
Yeah.
If I said I sent my army into Iraq, I'm responsible for what the army does. I didn't go there. I didn't pull the trigger, but guess what? I sent the army. So if you're the one sending the thing,
if I send an army to Iraq and then you start murdering unborn babies, you start murdering babies, that's not the person who sent you's fault.
It is. Listen to what I'm saying. If I send an army and the army does army things, I'm in charge. I'm on the hook for what that army did. If you send a lying or a deceiving spirit, and you know that it's a lying and a deceiving spirit, and you know what it's going to do, because remember, God's all-knowing, then you're responsible for it.
Okay, so God is also responsible for all the good we do?
No, I didn't say that. I'm saying in the passage you cited, when God sends the lying or the deceiving spirit, which is quoted in the Old Testament and slightly in the New Testament, when God does that thing, it just means God did it. That's all it means.
At face value, that's what it means.
I know, yeah, that's exactly what that means.
I know, I'm agreeing with you at face value. That's what it means.
That's all there is. All you have is face value.
The apparent contradiction. No, because
you can't resolve it.
Yeah. Okay. I guess you're pretty consistent. Even in Isaiah, like you take it in the literal context, you take everything like very literally, and like I appreciate that because you do kind of need that.
Like you don't think the Bible is lacking contradictions, do you?
Show me an example. Other than another one other than that one.
Okay. Have you ever read the conversion story of Paul on the road to Damascus?
A little bit, yeah.
Sure.
So he met the risen Christ.
Yeah. So there's some questions about what actually happened because it says he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? He asked, who are you, Lord? And the reply came, I am Jesus whom you're persecuting. Get up and enter the city, and you will be told what to do when you are there. And then it says, the men who were traveling with him stood speechless because they heard the voice, but saw no one. Okay, so in Acts chapter 9, the men traveling with Paul, they hear a voice, but they don't see who's speaking, and they're confused, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, in another retelling in chapter 22, says, these who were with me, this is Paul speaking now, these who were with me saw the light, but did not hear the voice of the one who was speaking. So in this particular case, they see the thing, but they don't hear the thing.
Yeah. Okay, so is it possible that there's a group, like in the group, there's just like half of them saw it and didn't hear it, and the other half heard it and didn't see?
It says, those who are with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have a lot of like language like that in like in the New Testament. When they go to visit the grave, like Matthew says he saw like one person, or Mark says he saw two people, but like even though like they're giving, this is actually used in like an actual evidence case. If you have multiple witnesses, if they're giving the same details of something, then it's like less of an honest take than if the people have different details of what they saw.
Right, but these are definitive claims. It says, the men who are traveling with him stood speechless. The other one said, those who are traveling with me. It doesn't say some, just, it says the people traveling with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm actually, hang on, let me just pull this up. I'm looking into it a little more right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just to...
Keep in mind that the correct answer is that it's a contradiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's basically saying what I just said now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, there's a lot of things in the Bible that at face value seem like a contradiction.
They
And
are a contradiction.
I'll even grant that they are a contradiction on face
Mm-hmm.
value. I'll even grant that. I'll even grant you that they are a
That
contradiction
means they
on face value.
contradict.
On face value, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Mark chapter 1, very beginning of the first gospel, Mark makes a blunder. It says, in the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, as it is written in the prophet Isaiah, see, I'm sending you my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way, the voice of the one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Fortunately, he misremembers. The first part of that quotation doesn't come from Isaiah. It comes from Malachi. It sounds like Isaiah chapter 40, but it's not.
Okay. So wait, in Mark 1 you're saying?
Yeah, Mark chapter 1, verse 2.
Yeah, for sure.
He says it's from Isaiah, but it's not. Also, horizontal stream is crushing it tonight. We got 750 people on the horizontal stream. Horizontal is going to be catching up to vertical stream. We've got 1,000 people on a vertical stream, 750 on horizontal. This is only like our third or our fourth horizontal stream. Vertical stream people, don't let horizontal overtake you. Let's see who's going to win this battle by the end of the summer. I want to see who wins. There's a lot of people asking for horizontal streams.
Yeah, it's also in Isaiah.
Oh,
It's in
sure.
both of them.
Show me where.
Isaiah 43.
No, chapter 43 is a quotation from Mark chapter 1:3, the voice of the one crying in the wilderness.
Oh yeah, okay. Oh, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet. Oh, I see. So you're saying he applies both of them to Isaiah?
Yeah, one is from Malachi and one is from
Yeah.
Isaiah. He says both
I,
of them came from Isaiah. They sound similar, but they're not.
mm-hmm. But Isaiah still makes reference a voice of one calling.
Yeah.
In the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord.
But he
I will
doesn't.
send my messenger who will prepare the way before me.
But he doesn't say, "See, I'm sending my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way." That's a quotation from Malachi chapter 3, verse 1.
Oh yeah, literally, it is literally.
Yeah.
I see. I see.
But they sound so
Well,
similar that Mark just goofed. Mark just thought they were both from Isaiah. He misremembered.
he misremembered. Maybe that's one way to look at it. Yeah, you could grant you could always grant the not so pleasing outcome, like the one that makes him look bad, or the one that actually makes sense and reconciles it. But
Well,
I understand from your
how do
perspective,
you
you're not going to grant the one that looks good, and I'm
how do
not
you
going to grant the one
reconcile the fact
that
that he said Isaiah said it when he didn't say it?
because Isaiah still has those words, but they're paraphrased. They're not in the exact wording.
He doesn't have the wording that is in verse 2. Those words are in Malachi, which is why every single study Bible you've ever owned says those are from Malachi. He just mashed them up. He gets a lot of stuff wrong.
I agree with what you're saying. He just mashes them up, but I think Isaiah is also has the same paraphrased. It's the same context, even if it's not written exactly the same. You're saying he's quoting it from Malachi. I agree, he's quoting it from Malachi, but the meaning is still the same. I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way.
No one's questioning the meaning.
Prepare the way for the Lord.
We're questioning who wrote the text. He's quoting a text, right? He's saying this text that I'm quoting was written by Isaiah, but it wasn't. It was written by Malachi.
Right. But the second part he gets right.
I know. The first part he doesn't. That means he got one thing wrong and one thing right. That's what that means. Now, he gets something wrong again.
Here's what I'm saying, though. Isaiah did say that. He just didn't say it in those words.
I know. But who said it in those words? Malachi, which is why he made the mistake, because they're so similar. His brain was like, he thought it was Isaiah. It's easy to do. Anyone can do it. The problem is that God's holy book shouldn't do it, which brings me to the very next chapter. He does another blunder. In verse 226, talks about David entering the house at Nob of the priests and eating the showbread. It says, entering the house of God when Abiathar was the high priest and ate the bread of presence. But in 1 Samuel 21, Abiathar is not the high priest. It's Ahimelech. He gets the wrong priest.
Sorry, I got to look up a lot of stuff tonight. You always bring up a lot of good points.
People asking where the horizontal stream is. I apologize. The horizontal stream is at DZ Debates. That's my horizontal channel. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with channel number 2 right off the rip, but I think the answer is that channel number 2 is obviously going to be nothing but horizontal from this time moving forward, and channel number 1 is going to be the usual stuff. But yeah, go over and watch the debates on, if you want horizontal, on DZ Debates. You'll find a link to that in my main profile if you want, or you can just search it up.
Yeah. So it's saying that in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, does not mean that Abiathar was the priest at that moment. The Greek phrase in Mark is, I don't know what that says, but in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, which just means, can mean the area associated with him.
But he was never the high priest when David ate the showbread.
The other one says Abiathar was present at the time and later became high priest. But
actually,
he was never high priest.
He couldn't have been present at the time. He was alive at the time. He couldn't have been present at the time because shortly after that, all of Ahimelech's household gets murdered except for Abiathar. He's the only one that escapes. Also, I would point out that the translation of "in the days of Abiathar" is spurious. That's not in the Greek text. People are adding that to the text. It's not. It's only in English, not in Greek.
Yeah, it says "in the time of," and it says it's a Greek phrase.
The Greek phrase "epi" doesn't mean "in the days of" or "in the time of." That's why my translation just says when.
Oh, when Abiathar the high priest.
Right.
Oh, I see. Okay. Anyway, I won't take up too much more of your time. I feel like we had a pretty good talk today. It was fun again.
Yeah,
I
I
enjoyed
think
that.
we have fun. Ruby, you're a good guy, and I know it's hard listening to the stuff coming out of my mouth as a believer, and you take it pretty
No, I
well.
fully, yeah, I get it, bro. Like, I don't think you're, I don't think you're coming at it from a malicious way. I think you're just very literal. You're very, me, I'm more of like a symbolic guy. So like all these double meanings for me, it's like I see them everywhere, even without like the preconditioning of like Christian beliefs, because I didn't have that growing up. But just like upon doing my research now, I start seeing that. But like, I think you're very literal, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. You want the evidence to be straightforward, and that, uh, I agree, man. For someone like, we all have different ways of like taking in information. And if it's not convincing for you in this way, then I don't know. There's not really any way to convince you, but I think we still have fun conversations anyway. And it's always fun to learn, man. So I want to thank you for letting me on the platform. Thank you, everyone in the chat. And yeah, that's it, man. Thanks.
Yeah, big W, Ruby. Thanks for hanging out with me.